Welcome back to Jack's Apocalypse. If you're new here, this is a channel where we go deep into survival horrors and stories that keep you up. Today's account is long, raw, and personal. It comes from a man named Dean Holloway. Dean was 22 years old when Manchester fell apart. He was not a soldier. He was not prepared. He was a stock boy at department store, and he made a lot of bad choices before he made one decent one. This is his story. First person, start to finish. So, let's begin.
My name is Dean Holloway. I'm telling you this because I need to. Not for sympathy. Not to make myself sound like something I wasn't. If I leave anything out, I'll tell you I'm leaving it out. I won't dress this up. The night it happened, I should not have been in the store. Closing time at Greystone's department store on Market Street was 8:30 in the evening. I stayed behind. Not for any noble reason. The overnight news had been full of blocked roads, strange reports from the hospital districts, and a travel alert that had gone out at around 6 in the evening, telling people to avoid the Ancoats area. My manager, Sandra, told everyone to go straight home and not to hang around on the high street. I nodded. I waited until she left. Then I went to the stockroom. I'd been watching the premium fragrance delivery for 3 weeks. 12 bottles of a designer cologne sitting in a sealed crate, logged in the system but not yet on the floor. Next to it on the shelf, a box of lightning cables and a pair of wireless earbuds still in their retail packaging. No cameras in the back stock corridor, or so I thought. I checked the ceiling grid twice. I filled a canvas tote bag, 4 bottles of cologne, 2 cable sets, 1 pair of earbuds. I told myself I'd resell them and that nobody would notice a small shrinkage discrepancy in a store that moved the kind of volume Greystones moved. I told myself that every week about something, and so far, it had been true. I zipped up the tote. I was heading toward the staff exit at the back of the building, the one that exits through the loading bay on Cannon Street, when I heard the first sound. It was not a scream exactly. It was more like someone trying to shout through a throat that wasn't working correctly. Low, wet, more effort than sound. It came from outside the loading bay doors, which were metal roller shutters, and those shutters were down, but the pedestrian door to the left of them was not fully latched. I could see a thin line of orange streetlight at the bottom of it. I stopped walking. The sound stopped too. Then something struck the outside of the pedestrian door. Not a knock. A body hitting it, shoulder or hip weight. Once, then again. Then there was a different sound. I did not know what it was at the time. Later I would understand it. But in that moment I just knew it was wrong, and I stepped back into the corridor and let the stockroom fire door close in front of me, as quietly as I could manage, with fingers that wouldn't do what I told them. I stood in the corridor for about 30 seconds. The fire door had a long vertical window of reinforced glass at head height, and through it I could see the loading bay floor, a grey concrete space about the size of a tennis court, lit by 2 industrial strip lights, yellow, green and old. Terry Webb, the night security guard, was in the bay. Terry was a man in his late 50s, heavy-set, ex-council services, and he had worked the Greystones night shift for 11 years. He was standing near the pedestrian door with his radio in his hand. Terry pushed the door open. He was saying something into his radio. I couldn't hear it through the fire door, but I could read the posture. He was reporting something. Being professional. The door swung out and the orange streetlight flooded in, and something came with it. I only saw the shape for a second before Terry stepped back and the door swung in with the weight of whatever was pushing it. Terry went down hard. The radio clattered across the floor. I did not open the fire door. I want to be clear about that. I stood there, and I watched through the glass, and I did not open it. Terry was making sounds. I was telling myself that I didn't know what was happening, that it might be a medical episode, that the man might be having a fit and the shape on top of him was just him falling awkwardly. I told myself a lot of things in those seconds. None of them made me put my hand on that door. 3 more shapes came through the pedestrian door. I turned and walked back through the corridor toward the sales floor. Fast, not running. Running meant noise. I already understood that much. Greystones on Market Street is 6 floors. Ground floor is cosmetics, women's accessories, and seasonal. First floor is women's fashion. Second is men's fashion and electrical. Third is home furnishings, bedding, and the restaurant. Fourth is children's clothing and toys. Fifth is the furniture showroom. Sixth, accessible only by freight lift or a locked staff staircase, is the Christmas warehouse and general overstock storage. I knew this building better than I knew most people's faces. The sales floor on the ground level was dark, emergency lighting only, small green-white pools every 8 meters above the main aisles. The perfume hall runs along the south wall, glass counters stretching 40 meters. The seasonal section, which in early November was full of bedding sets and duvet ranges in those tall cardboard display towers, sat in the northeast corner near the main public entrance. I went there because it was the most cover on that floor, and I had started moving with cover in mind, without quite deciding to. I got behind a tower of king-size duvet boxes and crouched down. The tote bag with the stolen goods was still over my shoulder. I put it on the floor next to me and waited. The main entrance to the store was a set of automatic glass doors facing Market Street, with a manual revolving door to the left of them. The automatics were locked from the inside, standard overnight protocol. Through the glass I could see the street. Under the orange sodium lights, Market Street looked wrong. A bin had been knocked over near the curb. A double-decker bus had stopped in the middle of the lane, empty, hazards still flashing. A woman in a dark coat was standing very still on the pavement facing away from me, and her stillness was not the stillness of a person waiting for something. Then she turned, and she walked toward the glass. Her walk was wrong, one shoulder lower than the other, one leg not bending at the knee the way it should. She reached the glass and put both hands on it, flat-palmed. I did not move. A second figure joined her, then a third. They didn't seem to be reacting to each other, just to the glass and whatever was beyond it. In the dark behind the glass counters, I was nothing. I knew that. But I stayed low and I stayed still. I don't know how long I was there before I heard another sound inside the store. A shuffle, coming from the direction of the perfume hall. Something that moved differently from the figures on the street. More spread out, less direct, like it was covering ground in a pattern rather than heading somewhere specific. I pressed myself against the side of the duvet tower and pulled the tower slightly to close the gap between it and the wall unit behind me. A figure came down the main ground floor aisle, walking slowly, both arms loose at its sides, head moving in small tilts left and right. It had been wearing a high-visibility vest at some point. Now the vest was torn at the shoulder and hanging off one side. I couldn't see its face clearly in the emergency lighting, but I could see the way it moved, and the way it moved told me enough. It passed me at a distance of perhaps 12 meters. It did not stop. It continued toward the back of the ground floor, toward the service corridors. I realized then that the pedestrian door in the loading bay must have come fully open, because I could feel, very faintly, the cool November air that should not have been present inside a sealed building. I waited another 5 minutes. Then I picked up the tote bag, left the seasonal section, and moved to the escalators. The escalators between the ground and first floors were off, frozen mid-step, which was normal for overnight. I walked up the left side, keeping close to the central divide, staying out of the sightline of the ground floor below. The first floor was women's fashion, and the emergency lighting here caught all the chrome rails and mirrors at strange angles, creating shapes wherever I looked that turned out to be nothing. I kept going up. Second floor, men's fashion at the front, electronics toward the back. The electronics section had a full glass partition wall and a separate key-coded staff door. I'd never had a reason to go in there in the evenings, so I didn't have the code. I noted it and moved on. Third floor, the restaurant was here. The kitchen at the back, staff accessed, would have food, dry goods, refrigerated items, everything the lunch and dinner service had used that day. I was thinking practically. I was not yet thinking about how long I might be in this building, but part of me was beginning to add things up. I went to the restaurant kitchen door. It had a push-bar release and no lock on my side. I went in, found a torch on the wall by the fire extinguisher, clicked it on, and swept the room. Standard commercial kitchen, stainless steel counters, double oven range, prep tables, a walk-in cold room. On the prep shelving, I found a bag of dried pasta, 2 cans of chopped tomatoes, a container of oats, and several sealed units of protein bars from the restaurant supply. I transferred the protein bars to my tote bag. I couldn't cook the pasta, but having it felt relevant. There was a large carving knife on the magnetic strip above the prep table. I stood there looking at it for about 10 seconds. Then I picked up a medium-weight chef's knife instead, the kind with a wide blade and a rubberized handle, and put it in the outer pocket of the tote with the blade wrapped in a folded dishcloth. Back on the restaurant floor, I found a window that faced north over the Arndale rooftop. Down on the street below, I could see a car on its side blocking the junction at Corporation Street. Blue lights were flashing somewhere to the east, but they weren't moving. A group of figures was moving up Market Street in a loose spread, and from this height their gait was unmistakable. They moved like people who had stopped knowing where they were going. I pulled back from the window. I turned off the torch. I sat on a restaurant chair in the dark and ate 1 protein bar and told myself to think. I thought about my phone. I had tried it already on the ground floor. No signal, which was unusual but not impossible if something had happened to the local infrastructure. Wi-Fi was down too, the store's network showing connected but no traffic reaching anything. I kept checking every few minutes. Nothing changed. I thought about the people outside, the figures at the door, the one with the high-vis vest, Terry, whatever had been in the loading bay. I didn't have a word for it yet. Nobody did, that first night. The news reports from earlier in the evening had used words like civil disorder and a suspected outbreak and possible contamination. Hospital footage that kept being cut away from. Officials speaking from behind desks with faces that said more than what they were saying out loud. I had only half watched it at the time because I was planning my evening's work in the stockroom. I decided to go higher. The 5th floor furniture showroom had a roof access hatch in the far corner. I'd been up there once in the summer to fix a display unit bracket that kept coming loose in the heat. The roof gave a clear view in all directions, and there was no way up from outside the building without equipment. I was moving through the 4th floor, past the children's clothing section with its knee-high rails and small folded jumpers, when I heard a voice. It was quiet. A woman. She was saying, "Hello, is someone there? Hello." I stopped. I kept the torch off. I said nothing. "I can see your feet under the door," she said. "The light comes in underneath. Please." The fitting rooms. I had not even seen the fitting room corridor in the low emergency lighting, but I was standing 3 meters from the entrance to it. There was a row of 6 cubicles, and the emergency light strip above the corridor cast a thin line of light at floor level through each closed door. One of the doors had feet behind it. "Who are you?" I said. "My name is Priya. I work on this floor. I do the sizing alterations. I heard everything going wrong, and I came in here because I didn't know what else to do. Who are you?" "Dean," I said. "Ground floor stock." "Can you help me?" I looked at the fitting room door. I looked at the direction I had been walking. I did a very quick and selfish calculation in my head about what helping her would cost me against what not helping her would cost me, and in that calculation I gave very little weight to what it would cost her. "I'm going to the roof," I said. "Stay where you are. There's a latch on the inside of those cubicle doors. You're safer staying put." She was quiet for a moment. Then, "Don't leave this floor without checking on me first, please." I said, "All right." I kept walking. And what do you think? Would you have stayed to help Priya, or would you have kept moving? Write your answer in the comments below. I read every single one. The 5th floor furniture showroom was a large open space divided by room set displays, living room arrangements, bedroom arrangements, dining sets. Everything was upholstered and pale, and in the emergency lighting it had the quality of a stage set after the audience has gone home. Room-shaped spaces with no rooms. Walls that were suggestion rather than structure. I moved through it quickly. The roof hatch was in the far northwest corner behind a wardrobe display. The hatch had a bolt on the inside and a fold-down metal ladder, and I went up it and out onto the roof and pulled it 3/4 shut behind me, wedging my toe under it. Manchester at that time of night should have been lit up. The Arndale Tower, the Beetham Tower to the southwest, the retail quarter lights and the road signs, and the constant wash of orange from the streets. What I saw instead was roughly half of that. Large sections of the city were dark. Not all at once, not uniformly, but enough that the shape of the skyline felt wrong. To the northeast, toward Ancoats, where the reports had been heaviest, there was nothing. A black rectangle where there should have been light. To the south, toward the university district, I could see small moving lights that I gradually understood were phone screens, many of them held by people moving in a crowd along Oxford Road. I sat on the rooftop for about 20 minutes. No one came to get me. Nothing reached the roof. The building below me was quiet. I could hear distant sirens, always moving, never arriving anywhere. Once, far to the east, there was a sound like a vehicle collision, loud enough to carry over the other sounds of the city, followed by nothing. I went back down. I did not check on Priya. I went to the third floor instead, and spent the night in the walk-in cold room with the door wedged open from the inside, using a heavy stockpot lid. I ate another protein bar. I slept in intervals, waking up at every sound from the floors below, of which there were several. Morning came through the high kitchen windows as a grey, flat light. I felt the kind of tired that comes after a night where the sleeping is worse than the staying awake. I checked my phone first thing. Still no signal. Still no data. The battery had dropped to 61%. I turned on battery saver mode and put it away. I went to the restaurant floor window that overlooked Market Street and looked out. The car that had been on its side at the junction was still there. 2 more vehicles had joined it, a white transit van and a dark saloon, both stopped at odd angles. The figures I had seen moving up the street the night before had dispersed or moved on. The street looked almost empty, but the bins that lined the pavement had been knocked over, their contents spread across the road. A set of double pushchair lay on its side near the bus shelter, a shoe in the gutter. 3 figures were standing at the far end of the street near the junction with Cross Street, standing still, not doing anything, just there. I watched them for a few minutes. They didn't react to the pigeons that landed near them. They didn't react to each other. 2 were upright and one had a pronounced lean to the left, like something in one side of it had stopped supporting weight correctly, and it was making small adjustments with one foot every 30 seconds or so to stay standing. I understood, watching that whatever this was, it wasn't people who were sick and recovering. It wasn't a crowd situation that would resolve. I went down to the ground floor. I did it slowly, checking each floor on the way down. First floor clear. Ground floor had 2 figures in it, near the back of the cosmetics section, moving along the glass counterline in a slow, random drift. I watched them from the top of the stationary escalator for about 4 minutes, observing the range they covered, the things that drew their attention. A metal display stand fell when one of them brushed it, and both figures turned toward the sound immediately, moving to it. They spent 2 minutes at the fallen stand before drifting apart again. Noise. That was the main thing to know about them. I also noticed, watching them, that one of them was a man I recognized. His name was Marcus, and he had been on the overnight team at the bookshop 2 doors down from Greystones for about a year. We had shared a cigarette outside the loading bay once in the autumn. He was wearing the same grey fleece he'd been wearing that day. He looked like Marcus in every visual particular except that he moved like he was in the room but not in it, which is the only way I know how to put it. I backed away from the escalator without making any sound and went to the service corridor that runs behind the ground floor retail space. This corridor connects the staff lift, the stock rooms, and the back-of-house offices. The manager's office was here. Sandra's office. Sandra was an organized person. She had been the store manager for 7 years, and her office reflected that. Everything filed, everything labeled. A whiteboard with the weekly rota on it, a pinboard with the escalation contact list, and in the top left desk drawer, which I knew about because I'd once had to retrieve a letter she'd asked me to file, and she'd shown me the drawer organization, a small cash box. The cash box wasn't what I was interested in. Taped to the underside of the cash box, which I also knew about because Sandra had once mentioned it in a half-serious, half-annoyed way when discussing the store's security review with the loss prevention team, was a folded card with the combination to the office safe. And in the safe, which I had never seen open but had heard Terry Webb mention more than once when he was being indiscreet, was the store's emergency kit. Documents, petty cash, and Terry's personal property. A small revolver that Terry had brought in years ago and somehow never removed, despite it being entirely against company policy. I went into Sandra's office. I opened the desk drawer. The cash box was there. I lifted it and found the card. The safe was a grey steel unit set into the wall behind Sandra's filing cabinet, and the combination worked on the second attempt. The emergency kit was a sealed folder of laminated documents and about £240 in mixed notes. The revolver was wrapped in an old chamois cloth. Beside it, 2 cardboard boxes of ammunition, each box holding 50 rounds. I put the revolver on the desk and looked at it for a while. It was a snub-nose. Older, well kept, but I had no idea how old. I was not a person who knew about guns. I had shot an air rifle once at a fairground when I was about 12 and missed every target. I picked the revolver up, turned it over. There was a cylinder release I could identify from films. I pushed it and the cylinder swung out. It was loaded. 5 rounds, all present. I closed the cylinder. I put the revolver in the tote bag, wrapped in the chamois, and put one of the ammunition boxes next to it. I left the second box. I took the £240, because I didn't know why not to, and I took the folder of documents on the assumption they might have contact numbers that still worked. I did something then that I am not going to explain away. I want to be honest about it. There was a body in the loading bay. Terry Webb. He had been there since the night before. I had seen him go down. I went into the loading bay through the fire door, moving carefully, checking that the pedestrian door was now shut and latched again, which it was. Someone or something had pushed it fully open, and then the spring-loaded mechanism had brought it back. Terry was on the floor near the center of the bay. He was not moving. He did not look like Marcus had looked. He looked gone. Terry had a bunch of keys on a retractable clip on his belt, the Storemaster keys. I unclipped them. Then I went back through the fire door, and I did not let myself think too hard about what I had just done, or how I had been able to do it. By mid-morning, I had established a loose routine. I used the staff service lift to move between floors without using the escalators, which were visible from large portions of each sales floor. The lift had an emergency key override that I could now operate with Terry's keys, meaning I could hold it at any floor I needed without it responding to any call buttons. I kept it on the 3rd floor, which became my base. From the restaurant kitchen, I now had access to hot food because the commercial gas range still had gas pressure. I boiled the pasta. I found a catering-sized jar of pesto on the prep shelf and ate a bowl of pasta with pesto at the kitchen counter at around 10 in the morning. Standing up, watching the kitchen fire door, and I have to tell you that it was the most focused I had eaten a meal in years. I spent the next hour on the 3rd floor walking slowly through the home furnishing section. I was mapping the floor. Not formally, I had no paper, but I was walking it and cataloguing. The home section had a fire door at the north end that connected to the maintenance staircase. That staircase was narrow and had a locked door at every floor access, which I could now open with Terry's keys. It ran the full height of the building, and its exterior walls were blank, no windows, no entry points from outside. It was, essentially, a vertical safe corridor through the building. In the home furnishing section there were blackout curtains, 8 display sets of them, heavy, fully lined, in various muted colors. I removed 4 sets from their display rails and brought them to the staircase landing. I didn't have a specific plan for them yet, but thick, heavy fabric that blocked light seemed like a resource. The ground floor still had activity. I monitored it from the top of the escalator, from which I had a partial view of about 40% of the floor space. The number of figures had increased. 3 in the morning had become 6 by midday. Most of them were moving slowly in the back half of the store, near the cosmetics and accessories section. One was near the main entrance, standing almost still, facing the glass doors, and the figures on the street had increased in number as well. There was now a crowd of around 15 to 20 outside the front of the store, pressed against the glass at the entrance. The automatic doors held. The glass was tempered, good quality, standard for a high street store of this size. But it was not going to hold indefinitely against persistent pressure, and the crowd was growing. At some point in the early afternoon, I remembered Priya. I went up to the 4th floor via the maintenance staircase. The children's clothing section was clear. The fitting room corridor was ahead of me, emergency strip light still on. I walked to the cubicle where I had heard her voice and knocked twice, low and quiet. "Still here," she said. Her voice was composed, more composed than mine would have been. I told her what I had found: the third-floor base, the kitchen, the maintenance staircase, the ground floor situation. I spoke quietly and concisely, and she listened without interrupting. When I finished, she said, "How many of them are on this floor?" "None that I've seen, but I haven't done a full sweep." "I need water. I've been in here since last night." The fitting rooms had a sink in the staff area at the end of the corridor for the seamstress work. Priya would have known that better than me. I told her about the sink. She was quiet for a moment. "I didn't want to open the door without knowing who else was out there," she said. "It's clear right now. Go to the sink, get water. If anything changes, I'll make a sound at the top of the staircase. 2 knocks. Go back to the cubicle if you hear it." I heard the latch click. The door opened. Priya Sharma was a small woman in her mid-30s, with dark circles under her eyes and the slightly unsteady look of someone who had been completely still for too many hours. She was holding a pair of fabric shears from the seamstress station, and her knuckles were tight around the handle. She looked at me, and I looked at her, and neither of us said anything for a moment. She went to the sink. I stood in the fitting room corridor entrance and watched the 4th-floor sales floor. Nothing moved. When she came back, she said, "What do we do now?" I said, "I'm not sure yet." She looked at me for a moment with an expression that I recognized as the expression of a person deciding how much to trust what they're being told. "All right," she said, "show me the 3rd-floor setup." We spent the afternoon of the first full day going through the store systematically. Priya was methodical in a way I was not. She made a list on the back of a receipt she found in her coat pocket, writing in small, precise letters with a pencil she had taken from the seamstress station. Food sources, water sources, light sources, exit points, problem areas, unknowns. She moved quietly and deliberately, and when she stopped to listen, she stopped completely, not the half-attentive pause I had been managing. The unknowns column on her list was the longest. We identified 3 more figures on the 2nd floor that afternoon, in the men's section near the suit rails. We gave them a wide berth via the maintenance staircase. One of those figures had been a Greystones employee, a man from the menswear team called Owen, who had the kind of natural tidiness that made me recognize him even from across the floor by the way his clothes sat on him. That didn't sit well with either of us, and we didn't discuss it. The cosmetics counter on the ground floor was something I was thinking about. Not for cosmetics. The beauty counter at Greystones was a full-service operation with a back-of-counter storage section that contained every product used for demonstrations and treatments. That storage section had aerosol dry shampoos, acetone nail polish removers, alcohol-based toners, and a professional-grade isopropyl cleaning solution for the counter surfaces that came in liter containers. I had done a ground floor stock audit twice and knew approximately what was back there. I told Priya about it. She understood immediately what I was thinking. She said, "You want to get down there? There are at least 6 of them on the ground floor." "Not yet," she said. "Not while we don't know if there are more coming in." I accepted that, for the time being. The mistake I made on the 2nd night was the watch cabinet. The premium watch display on the 2nd floor was a locked glass cabinet at the front of the men's section, near the escalator landing. Inside were 23 watches, ranging in price from about £300 up to one that I had once joked with a colleague about, a dress watch in a branded case that retailed at £4,100. I knew Terry's keys included a general retail cabinet key for the manager's override. I went at 2 in the morning, while Priya was asleep in the restaurant. I moved through the maintenance staircase to the 2nd floor and opened the floor access door slowly. The 3 figures in the men's section were still there, 2 of them near the suit rails at the back of the floor, one closer to the middle aisle, facing away from me. The watch cabinet was roughly 15 meters from my position at the staircase door. I moved along the wall in the dark, not using the torch, staying out of the emergency lighting pools. I reached the cabinet. I found the key on Terry's ring. I unlocked it. The cabinet hinge was silent, but the mechanism in the catch, as the door swung fully open past a certain point, made a click. Small, mechanical, completely ordinary. In an empty floor in a building where every sound carried, it was loud enough. The figure in the middle of the floor turned. I froze. I pressed myself against the side of the cabinet and became as still as I could. The figure was looking in my general direction. It took 2 steps toward me. Then it stopped. It tilted its head. It was doing what they all did, triangulating on a sound it had already half lost. If I didn't make another sound in the next 30 seconds, it would drift away again. I had seen this happen twice on the ground floor. But my arm was pressed against the cabinet shelf, and there were loose items on that shelf, and one of them, a boxed watch that had been placed at an angle, was sliding. Very slowly. I could feel the box against my forearm, moving under its own weight, tilting toward the edge of the shelf. I could not move my arm without moving it, and moving it would push the box. The box was going to fall. I caught it. I got 2 fingers under the corner of it as it went past the edge, and held it there against the front of the cabinet, hanging in space. The figure in the aisle took 3 more steps forward. Now it was 8 meters away. I could see its face in the emergency lighting. It was looking at the cabinet, not at me, tracking the sound of the box scraping the shelf. The 2 from the back of the floor were moving now too. All 3 were converging on the cabinet. I had about 3 seconds. I placed the box carefully on the nearest surface, which was the top of a jeans display table. I slid away from the cabinet to my left, keeping below the level of the display tables, and moved fast toward the staircase door. I reached it, got through it, eased it shut. I heard the figures reach the cabinet on the other side of the door. One of them made contact with the display table, which shifted slightly, then quiet. I stood in the maintenance staircase and looked at my empty hands. I had not taken a single watch. When I got back to the 3rd floor, Priya was awake, sitting at the kitchen counter. She looked at me. She looked at my empty hands. She didn't say anything. I wanted to see what was up there, I said, which was not entirely untrue. She looked at me for another moment, and then went back to the list she had been updating. I made tea on the kitchen range, using a box of tea bags from the supply shelf, and sat across from her, and drank it and did not mention the watches. The second day was longer and harder. The crowd at the front entrance had grown. I counted over 40 figures pressed against the glass at various points through the morning. And the glass, which had been solid, was developing a hairline crack in the lower right panel of the rightmost door. The automatic door mechanism had given up trying to open at some point in the night, overwhelmed by the pressure of bodies against it. And now the panel sat immovable. But the crack was there. I told Priya about the crack, and she added it to the unknowns column. The number of figures inside the building was also growing. Something was getting in through the loading bay, or through a ventilation access at the back of the building that I hadn't fully secured, because by mid-morning, the ground floor had at least 10 or 11 figures on it, up from 6 the previous day. None had made it above the ground floor yet, and the fire door between the loading bay and the service corridor was now chocked shut with a section of steel shelf bracket I had found in maintenance storage. But I had not checked every entry point with the thoroughness it needed. We found the 3rd person hiding in the building at around 1 in the afternoon on the 2nd day. His name was Gary Brannick. He was 51 years old, worked deliveries for a food service company, had been making an evening drop to the Greystones restaurant loading dock when everything went wrong. He had found his way up to the 5th floor furniture showroom and had been sleeping in a display bed and eating cereal bars from a box he had found in a sample food hamper on the giftware shelves. He had a company phone that got a signal intermittently and through which he had gathered fragments of what was being reported. The reports were not good. The situation was national, possibly international. The official language had shifted from outbreak and contamination to terms nobody was ready to define clearly. Gary was frightened in the open, practical way of a man who has had a decent run of ordinary life and suddenly finds it unavailable. He talked too much when he was nervous, which was a problem in a building where noise was the main thing to manage, and Priya handled him better than I did. She sat with him for 20 minutes and listened to him work through his fear out loud, and by the time she was done, he was quieter and had agreed to the signal protocol we had established. That evening, as the second night settled over the city, I looked at Priya's list and at the building around me, and I started thinking about the roof. The roof of Greystones on Market Street was a flat, accessible space. Adjacent to it, via a section of parapet wall and a 2-meter gap, was the roof of the Cannon Street parking structure. The car park was a 5-level structure, with a street-level entrance on Cannon Street and a covered walkway connection to the store at the second-floor level. That walkway had been gated from the store side. The gate was locked. I had a key that might open it. From the car park roof, if you went down through the structure, you came out onto Cannon Street at ground level. Cannon Street ran east from Market Street and had never been as heavily trafficked as the main shopping thoroughfare. From what I had seen from the roof the night before, Cannon Street had a handful of abandoned vehicles and a small number of figures, far fewer than Market Street. It was not a clear path, but it was a direction. I did not tell the others about this yet. I kept it in mind as a possibility that depended on other things not going wrong first. In the early hours of the third day, the situation changed. I was on the 5th floor, watching the street from the furniture showroom window, when I saw a light below on Market Street. Not an emergency light and not the residual glow of a working street lamp, but a handheld light. A torch, strong and directed, moving with the deliberate purpose of a person who knew where they were going. 3 lights, in fact, following each other in a line along the pavement from the direction of the Arndale Centre. They stopped in front of Greystones. I watched the beams sweep the entrance, move along the glass frontage, sweep back. I watched one beam go to the cracked lower panel of the rightmost door. I watched the 3 lights go still for about a minute, close together, as if the people holding them were conferring. Then they moved to the side of the building, toward the Cannon Street corner, and disappeared from my line of sight. I went to the maintenance staircase immediately and down to the ground floor. I went to the service corridor window that had a partial view of the Cannon Street side of the building. I got there in time to see the 3 lights re-emerging from behind the skip that sat in the loading bay access lane. They had been checking the loading bay door, and they had found the pedestrian door, which was spring-loaded, but whose frame had been damaged on the first night and which no longer fully latched. One of the lights went out. The other 2 went still. I went back up the staircase to the 3rd floor and woke Gary and Priya. This is where things really start to shift. If you're still watching, and thank you for that, drop a comment telling me whether you trust the people with the torches. Good guys or something worse. I genuinely like to know what you think. People, I said. Outside, coming in through the loading bay. 3 of them at least. Gary said, "That's good, isn't it? That's other survivors." Priya said, "What were they doing before they came to the door?" I told her, checking the front entrance, the cracked panel, working around the building to find an access point. She was quiet for a moment. "That's a planned entry," she said. "They weren't looking for shelter. They knew what they were looking for." Gary started to say something about the benefit of the doubt, and Priya said, quietly but firmly, "I'm not saying they're a threat. I'm saying we don't know what they are yet. And in this building right now, not knowing is enough of a reason to be careful." We moved everything important to us out of the 3rd floor and up to the staircase landing. The food supplies, the tote bag, Priya's list, the torch, and an extra set of batteries I had found in the electrical section on the 2nd floor. Gary had a small backpack with his personal items. We went to the staircase and pulled the fire door shut behind us. We waited. For about 40 minutes nothing happened. Then we heard movement in the service corridor below the 3rd floor, and voices. More than 3, at least 5, maybe 6, not trying to be quiet. There was something cooking in here. Professional kitchen, there's food. Watch the door. Sounds of the kitchen being opened and searched, a clatter of pans, someone swearing at the noise, someone else telling them to keep it down, footsteps on the restaurant floor, a dragging sound, a chair being moved. I had the staircase fire door open by a centimeter and was listening through it. Gary was behind me on the landing. Priya was on the step above, her fabric shears in both hands. A voice from the restaurant floor. Check the rest of the floor. Footsteps coming toward the corridor, coming toward the staircase fire door. I eased the fire door shut and moved up the staircase. We went up 2 floors to the 5th floor landing, as quietly and quickly as the narrow staircase allowed, and stood there breathing and listening. The fire door at 3rd floor level did not open. The footsteps in the corridor had either stopped or gone in a different direction. We sat on the 5th floor landing for an hour. The sounds from below were intermittent and never came closer. Eventually Gary sat down on the floor against the wall and crossed his arms and looked exhausted in a very total way. "We can't stay in this staircase indefinitely," Priya said, quiet enough that only I could hear it. "I know," I said. "We have water upstairs in the kitchen and in the sink on 4. We have some food in the bag. The people on 3 have the majority of the food now." She said this without accusation, stating it. I thought about the roof, about the car park roof across the 2-meter gap, about the walkway gate on the 2nd floor. I thought about the blackout curtains I had left on the 3rd floor landing before we moved to the staircase, which were now inaccessible. I thought about the cosmetics counter on the ground floor. By morning, the group on the 3rd floor had at least 7 people. We could hear them more clearly now because they had stopped worrying about quiet entirely. They were conducting a systematic search of the building, floor by floor. At around 8 in the morning, we heard them on the 4th floor, and one of them tried the staircase fire door at 4th floor level, which opened, and a torch swept in. Staircase, goes up and down. Anyone in it? We were 2 floors above the light. We were invisible. But a methodical person would go up, and the voice asking about the staircase sounded like a methodical person. "Move up," I said to Priya and Gary. We went up to the 6th floor, the Christmas warehouse. I unlocked the floor access door with Terry's key, and we went through it into the overstock storage space. I relocked it from the inside. The 6th floor was a low-ceilinged space running the full footprint of the building, full of shelving units loaded with flat-packed seasonal merchandise and general overstock, with a freight lift shaft at one end and the roof access hatch at the other. It was also where we found the child. He was behind a shelving unit near the north wall, sitting on a flattened cardboard box between 2 pallets of shrink-wrapped Christmas crackers. He looked about 9 years old, and he had been there long enough that the cardboard was soft under him. He had a half-empty bottle of still water and a torn cellophane sleeve of crackers, the food kind, that had come from somewhere in the stock. He had opened packaging off the shelves to find something to eat and drink, which showed a level of practical thought that I hadn't expected. He looked at us without saying anything. Priya sat down on a pallet across from him. "Hello," she said. "What's your name?" After a moment he said, "Callum." "How long have you been up here, Callum?" "2 nights. He said it plainly, as if it was a fact he had been holding on to. 2 nights. He had been on the 6th floor since before either of us had been in the building. He had come through the store entrance before it locked down, become separated from whoever he was with in the confusion, found his way to the highest accessible point in the building, and survived there by finding food in the overstock and staying quiet. I looked at Gary. Gary looked at his feet. Priya gave Callum the last 2 protein bars from our bag and a full bottle of water from the kitchen carry supply. She told him that we were leaving the building and he was coming with us. She said it as a statement and not a question, and he accepted it as one. Down in the staircase, I could hear the group from the 3rd floor working their way upward. They were at the 5th floor now, moving through the furniture showroom, calling to each other without much care for the noise. I heard someone say, "There's a roof hatch over here." That was the furniture showroom roof hatch, not the one connected to the car park side, but it meant they were about to be on the roof. And once they were on the roof, they would see the same thing I had seen 2 nights ago. The car park structure. The gap. We had very little time. I called the others together in the 6th floor warehouse. Priya, Gary, Callum. I told them the plan. The roof. The 2-meter gap to the car park roof. Down through the parking structure to Cannon Street. It depended on the gap being passable and the car park being accessible, neither of which I could guarantee. Gary said, 2 meters. I can't jump 2 meters. It's not a vertical jump. The parapet is at the same height on both sides, and the gap is narrow enough to step across with support. I've seen it from the roof. I hadn't actually measured it. I was working from a visual estimate made in the dark. Priya said, "What about the ground floor, the cosmetics counter?" "We don't need it if we leave now." She held my gaze for a moment. "And if the gap isn't passable, or the car park is not clear, then we come back and use what the store gives us." She nodded. She was reading something in my face, and I didn't know what it was. "All right," she said. "Roof first." We went through the warehouse to the freight lift shaft at the north end. The freight lift was not powered, but next to the shaft was a metal door with a push bar that opened onto a narrow external fire escape, one of the original building features that predated the store's current fit-out. The fire escape was steel mesh, external, running down the side of the building in the gap between Greystones and the adjacent office block, which meant it was not visible from Market Street or from Cannon Street directly. It also stopped 2 floors below the roof level, terminating at a junction with the building's main external wall. But it meant we could get to the roof without using the staircase. Above the fire escape termination point, 4 floors up on the external wall, there was a maintenance ladder bolted to the brickwork, running up to a hatch in the flat roof edge. I had seen this from the rooftop on my first night up there. I had not anticipated needing to use it. The ladder was steel, fixed, standard building maintenance equipment. The gap between the fire escape railing and the ladder's lowest rung was about 1.5 meters of blank wall. I stood on the fire escape and looked at it. Then I went back into the warehouse, found a section of aluminium display rail from the overstock shelving, about 2 meters long, and brought it back out. Priya was watching me work. I wedged one end of the rail between the fire escape railing uprights and pushed the other end across to the wall. It reached. The top of the rail rested against the brickwork below the ladder's lowest rung. It wasn't a bridge exactly. It was an inclined surface to pull yourself up on. "That's not safe," Gary said. "No," I agreed. I went first. I pulled myself up the rail on my stomach, using the fire escape railing as a starting point, and reached the lowest rung of the maintenance ladder and got my hand around it and swung my weight across. The rail clattered but held. I went up the ladder to the roof hatch, opened it, and called down. Priya came next, then Callum. Gary took 4 attempts before he managed it, and he was shaking when he got to the top, but he got there. I pulled the display rail up after us and left it on the roof. We were on the roof. It was grey morning, overcast, wind coming from the northwest. The city around us was partially dark and partially normal looking, in the way that was worse than fully dark because the contrast kept making your brain treat it as repairable. The car park structure was to the east. The parapet between the 2 buildings was at consistent height on both sides. The gap was approximately 1.5 meters, not 2 as I had estimated, and the parapet was wide enough to stand on, about 30 centimeters. I crossed it first, 1 foot on the Greystones parapet, 1 step to the car park parapet done. Priya brought Callum across, holding his arm through the step. Gary crossed on his own and did not look down, which was the right decision. On the car park roof we regrouped and I checked the stair access hatch in the car park roof, which was unlocked, which meant people had been here recently, which was something to keep in mind. "Stay here," I said. "I'll check the structure." Priya said, "Go carefully." She sat next to Callum against the rooftop access housing and kept her hand close to the fabric shears. The car park was a 5-level structure, and levels 4 and 3 were clear. Level 2 had 2 figures in it, in the far corner near the lift shaft. I watched them from the staircase door for 2 minutes. They were not mobile in the way the other figures had been. They were extremely still, the kind of stillness that raised questions about whether they were still a threat or had passed beyond that. I did not investigate. I went back to the staircase and continued down. Level 1 and the ground floor vehicle access ramp were both clear. The vehicle exit barrier was down, solid metal, but the pedestrian exit gate to Cannon Street was the type that opened with a push bar from the inside. I pushed it. It opened. I looked out onto Cannon Street. The street was not clear. There were 3 figures visible, spread over about 200 meters of pavement. One was near a parked van about 80 meters east, facing away. One was about 50 meters away on the opposite pavement, moving slowly northward. One was standing against a wall about 30 meters east, not moving at all. No crowd, no mass. 3 figures, known positions. I went back up to the roof. I told the others what I had found. I told them about the 2 on level 2, that we would need to move through that level quietly and quickly, sticking to the north wall of the structure and giving the far corner a wide berth. I told them about the 3 on Cannon Street. Gary said, "Where do we go once we're on the street?" "East," I said, "toward the northern quarter. The streets are narrower, more access to building interiors, less traffic flow historically, less concentration of people." I was reasoning from what I knew about Manchester's geography. It was not a plan. It was a direction. Priya looked at me. "All right," she said. "Let's go." We got through the car park. Level 2 took about 4 minutes, hugging the north wall, the two figures in the far corner not reacting to us. Callum moved without being told where to step, mirroring Priya's footfalls exactly. Gary held the tote bag and kept his breathing even, which I knew because I was listening. At the ground floor exit, I stopped the group. I went through the pedestrian gate first and moved to the parked van 80 meters east, checked behind it, checked the pavement ahead. The figure that had been by the van had moved north down a side street. I waved the others through. Priya came through with Callum. Gary was halfway through the gate. I heard a sound from above, from the roof of the car park. I looked up. A figure was at the rooftop edge, looking down. Not one of the afflicted. A person. The group from Greystone's 3rd floor had reached the car park roof. They had found the parapet. They had followed us. And I had left the roof access hatch on the car park open. The figure at the roof edge was pointing down at us and calling back to whoever was behind them. "Move," I said to the others. "East. Don't run. Move at pace and keep to the building line." We moved. 40 meters down Cannon Street, I looked back. The group from the store was emerging from the car park pedestrian gate in a loose file of 6 people. They were not hostile in their body language, not that I could tell from this distance, but they were coming toward us at a matching pace. I didn't know what they wanted. I didn't have the time to find out. "Left here," I said, turning down a side street that cut between 2 older brick buildings. The street was narrow enough that 2 people could not walk comfortably side by side. No figures visible. The group behind us would have to funnel through the same gap and would lose sight of us for the time it took them to navigate it. We ran. And then I stopped. Priya, Gary, and Callum were ahead of me. I was at the entrance to the side street, 1 foot in, 1 foot back on Cannon Street. I had been thinking about nothing but myself and these 3 people. I had been very focused and very purposeful, and very much in the mode of someone moving forward and not looking back. But the group behind us was 6 people, and among them, when I had looked back, I had seen something I had registered without properly processing. A small figure, moving at the back of the group. Not an adult. Not the confident pace of someone who knew where they were going. A child, another one, not Callum. Priya had already rounded the end of the side street and disappeared. I stood at the entrance for 3 seconds, then I stepped back out onto Cannon Street and waited. The group from the store came around the corner at a walk. When they saw me standing there alone, they slowed. The person at the front was a large man with a long jacket and an empty garden center trolley he had been using to carry supplies. He held up a hand. Not a threat, a stopping motion. "We're not trouble," he said. "We just need to know where you're going." "East," I said. "Northern quarter." He nodded. "We found the same thing you found. The car park." He paused. "There's a young lad with us. Found him on the 3rd floor, hiding in the soft furnishing section." The small figure at the back of the group was a boy, younger than Callum, maybe 7. He was holding the hand of a woman next to him and looking at the pavement. He was wearing a Greystones carrier bag looped over one arm with things in it. I looked at the large man. I looked at the group. 6 adults, 1 child. The adults had the look of people who had been through a very bad 2 days and had made it this far by working together. Nobody had a weapon that I could see except one woman who was carrying a fire extinguisher under her arm like a tool. "Come with us," I said. "We move quietly, we follow signals, and we don't split up in any space where the group can't be accounted for." The large man said, "Agreed." He put out his hand. His name was Marcus Dean, he told me, which made me pause for a second because Marcus was the name I had assigned in my head to the figure I had seen in the cosmetics section, who had looked like the man from the bookshop. It was a different Marcus. This Marcus had a grip like a builder, and calm eyes, and smelled of a department store's worth of borrowed deodorant. I shook his hand and we started moving east. "We're getting close to the end now, and I want to ask you something before we finish." When Dean stopped and went back, was that the right call? Given everything he did earlier in the story, would you have done the same? Write it in the comments. There's no wrong answer. The northern quarter that morning was quieter than Market Street, but it was not safe. Tibb Street had 3 cars at a standstill blocking the width of the road, engines off, one still with its radio running on battery power, a morning music program playing at low volume into the empty street. We gave it a wide berth by cutting through a covered arcade. 2 figures in the arcade, both oriented toward the far end, where a takeaway's metal shutter was making a low vibrating noise in the wind. We moved past them on the left at a distance of about 6 meters. Nobody stopped. Nobody made a sound. On Thomas Street, we found what we had been looking for, without knowing we were looking for it. A pub, one of the old ones. Thick Victorian brickwork, heavy door with a manual bar lock, no windows on the ground floor except 2 high, narrow frosted ones that would not provide access. The pub door was locked from inside. Someone was already in there. Marcus Dean knocked twice, waited, knocked 3 times. A pattern. Intentional. After about 30 seconds, a voice from behind the door said, "Who's with you?" 7 adults and 2 children, Marcus said. A pause. Then bolts being drawn back. The door opened inward, held by a man in his 40s with a broken nose that looked recent, wearing a pub landlord's apron. Behind him, the interior of the pub was lit by 3 camping lanterns on the bar, at least 10 people inside, a functioning space. I stood at the threshold and looked into the pub. Priya was beside me. Gary was already speaking to someone near the bar. Callum was still holding Priya's sleeve, but looser than before, looking around the room with an alertness that wasn't fear. The landlord with the broken nose said, "You can come in, but the door stays locked after you're through, and if you've brought anything in with you that you haven't told us about, that's the end of your welcome." He said it without aggression, just as terms, plain and clear. "Understood," I said. We went in, the door locked behind us. In the pub, I sat at a corner table with a pint glass of water, and I stayed there for about an hour without saying much to anyone. Priya went and found where they kept the blankets, which was in a storage room off the main bar, and brought Callum one, and then brought me one, which I had not asked for, and which I accepted without comment. She sat across from me. She put her list on the table. She had added the pub to it. "You went back," she said. It was not a question. I saw the other one, the smaller one. She was quiet for a moment. "You left me in the fitting room." "Yes," I said. She folded the list and put it in her pocket. "Well," she said, "that's the difference, isn't it?" I didn't answer that. I didn't know what to do with it yet. I finished the water and looked at the door and thought about the city outside and about how much I didn't know and how much I had been wrong about in the past 3 days. There are things I haven't told you because they are not mine to tell. What happened to certain people in the group, what the landlord's name was, and what he eventually decided to do. What the radio in the Tibb Street car said when someone finally got close enough to hear it clearly. Those are other people's accounts. What I can tell you is what I know about myself at the end of those 3 days. I went into that building to steal. I stayed in it because I ran out of other options. I found people and I made bad choices about them. And I made those choices quickly and without much difficulty, which is the part that should bother me the most, and which does. I used the building the way the building let itself be used, and some of those uses were clever, and some of them were lucky, and the difference between clever and lucky is not always visible at the time. I took Terry Webb's keys off his belt in the loading bay. I watched Marcus from the bookshop drift down a retail aisle like he'd never known his own name. I sat in a walk-in cold room eating pasta at 10 in the morning and told myself I was being practical. I went after a watch cabinet in the middle of the night for no good reason and nearly ended everything because of it. I left Priya Sharma in a fitting room cubicle with a pair of shears because she would have slowed me down. And then I stopped on a side street off Cannon Street because I had seen the back of a small person's head in a group of strangers. And something in me that had been very quiet for 2 days made itself loud enough to hear. I don't know what that means about me. I don't think it cancels anything out. Priya would probably tell you the same thing, and she would be right. But it was the first time in 3 days that I did something, because it was the right thing to do, with no calculation attached to it, and I remember exactly what that felt like. It felt like stepping over a gap between 2 rooftops, 1 foot on each side for a second, then through. The pub on Thomas Street held for 11 days. I'll leave the rest of that for another time, if there is another time. This part ends with me sitting at a corner table with a glass of water and a blanket I didn't ask for, with the door locked, with the city outside being whatever it was becoming, with Callum asleep on a bar bench with his shoes still on, because nobody had told him yet that he could take them off. That's Dean Holloway's account. That's Greystones on Market Street, Manchester, 3 days and 2 nights. That's what staying behind to take something that wasn't yours costs you, and what you might find on the way to paying it back. If you're watching this on Jack's Nightmares, you already know how this channel works. These accounts don't always end cleanly. They don't always end hopefully. This one ends in a locked pub with the sound of the city outside, and I'll take that. If you found Dean's story worth your time, hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one, and leave a comment telling me which moment from this account stayed with you the longest. The watch cabinet, the fitting room, the gap between the rooftops. Whatever it was, write it down. I'll be reading. See you in the nightmares.